Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Outlandish, when we are going to talk about how we potentially discovered alien life living on Mars in 1984. Today we're going to talk about a 9-page document that was released by the CIA that talks about an exploration, a remote viewing of Mars more than 1 million years ago. Now, a lot of freaking YouTube videos have been made about this exact subject. In fact, if you search this subject, you'll probably find a whole bunch of people that will give you a whole bunch of knowledge, but none of those videos are this video. This video is special. Why, do you ask? Well, it's because I have a very cool personal experience connected to all of the craziness and random tidbits from psychic crazy history. Okay, starting over. The United States government tried to do psychic stuff. If you haven't heard of this, this is a thing. We know it's real. They have tested psychic powers. A lot of you who are watching this video maybe already knew that. Maybe you've heard of things like MKUltra, which I will explain in a minute. But maybe you also had no idea that the United States military and intelligence agencies were interested in literal psychic powers. All of this stuff's coming out about the UAPs, UFO stuff, so it's obvious that now that's becoming more mainstream. But in the 80s, if you would have talked about this sort of stuff, you would have been just friggin' absolutely made fun of. MKUltra was a covert CIA program from 1953 to 1973. They were literally trying to create mind control techniques. They used drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological torture to kind of like break through the human mind. Now, all of this was declassified in the 1970s and they had Senate hearings about it, but MKUltra is like the entry-level weird thing that the government's done. What you maybe haven't heard of is something even weirder and even stranger called Project Stargate. Now, there is a semi-popular movie that came out about this not too long ago. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe you didn't know when you were watching that movie that all of it was based on real life. But let me tell you a little bit about Project Stargate. Project Stargate was a remote viewing program. It was a joint effort between the CIA and the US military. It started in the 1970s and ran through all the way to the 1990s, and actually the documents about it have only been declassified for about a quarter of a century. The year 2000 is when we learned that all this crazy, weird, bonker stuff was going on. Now, the formation of Project Stargate started specifically as a response to things that we thought the Russians might be doing. Literally, that's how it happened. People thought that the Russians were investigating extrasensory perception, also known as ESP, and remote viewing and all these psychic powers, and we got scared and we're like, dang, the Russians aren't gonna figure it out before us, so we gotta start conducting experiments. And conduct experiments they did. The CIA and the United States Army tested trained individuals to see if they could remotely view something. It's essentially mentally seeing distant objects without actually being there, or events or places or really any sort of intel, but just literally psychically imagining it and seeing if you can gather this intel. Which of course sounds absolutely crazy, but this didn't stop us from spending millions of US tax dollars to see if there was legitimacy to this. Now, this funding and oversight was originally run by the Stanford Research Institute, and later Project Stargate was overseen by the DIA and NSA and other various agencies. But what it boils down to is the freaking government was freaking trying to see if psychic powers existed, so that we could spy on the Soviets, the Russians. Let's just check to just see if people have superpowers, just because we know Russia's checking to see if people have superpowers. Now, all of that sounds insane. All of that sounds buck wild, depending on who you are and depending on maybe what YouTube videos that you watch and what you believe. All of it seems like it comes from, not reality, but maybe a certain cinematic universe, which shall not be named on this channel. But here's the crazy part. The reports, the official documents, they say that these experiments kind of worked. Sometimes they really worked. Allegedly, these remote viewers helped locate hostages. They found downed aircraft and even identified military targets that were formerly unknown. But though there were some successes, the results overall were deemed inconsistent, and eventually Project Stargate was shut down. This happened in 1995 after a CIA commission study found no actionable intelligence value. Now, despite all that skepticism, a lot of the people that were involved with Project Stargate, including participants and officials, government officials, felt that remote viewing still had real intelligence applications. Now, it remains a subject of great debate, and there are more than a couple conspiracy theories about it, but I'm not here to talk about Project Stargate as a whole. I'm not here to advocate for Project Stargate as a whole. I'm not even here to tell you that remote viewing is true, but I am here to share with you a very interesting series of events that makes me think maybe there's something to it. Now, the individuals that were the actual remote viewers at the time, their identities were covered, but we have since learned who they are. Specifically, Ingo Swann, Pat Price, and Joseph McMonagle. They have become very well-known figures in the remote viewing community, a community that is alive and well. But specifically, Joseph McMonagle is somebody that we want to talk about. He was known as Remote Viewer 001, and he saw the surface of Mars a million years ago. I'm talking about a very specific remote viewing session that took place on May 22nd, 1984. Now, this experiment has become famous because a remote viewer, who we now know as Joseph McMonagle, was asked to physically see Mars in the year 1 million BC. So I guess technically 1,000,2025 years ago. The interesting thing is that the subject was actually never told that they were supposed to be remote viewing Mars. The experiment went as follows. The official put in a sealed envelope certain coordinates, the planet Mars, and 1 million BC. They were all written on a piece of paper, put in an envelope, and set on a table in front of the remote viewer. The remote viewer did not open the envelope, and the official asked them what they could see of the location within the envelope. Now, even though Joseph did not know that the target was Mars, he described the Martian landscape. Descriptions included massive pyramidal-like rocks, deep canyons, dust storms, and a thin, hazy atmosphere. Now, the subject had no idea what location it could be. Somewhere in Russia, Siberia, somewhere that the intelligence wanted to gain intelligence on. But they described something eerily similar to our orange neighbor. And as part of the experiment, the official changed the coordinates several times. And what's interesting is those coordinates line up with the description that the remote viewer gave, at least roughly. Now, the fact that Joseph didn't even know he was supposed to be on Mars is noteworthy, because if he was able to tell anything, it wasn't because he knew what was inside that envelope. But that's not all, and it's far from the most interesting part of this 9-page document. The strangest part about this document is that he describes an ancient civilization. Joseph reports seeing tall, thin humanoids. He said they were seemingly an advanced but dying race. He described the way that their clothes fit. He described a lot of attributes about how they looked, how they acted, and how they spoke to him. Joseph described that these individuals were in some sort of hibernation state, but somehow were able to perceive him there, perceiving them, and they engaged in a conversation. The Martians said that they had suffered a great planetary disaster, seemingly linked to a climactic or ecological upheaval. And in response to this enormous cataclysm, the Martians divided into different groups. One of these groups attempted to flee their dying world, possibly seeking refuge elsewhere. And the other group entered this hibernating state, the one that he described viewing. These hibernation chambers were deep underground, and these Martians were apparently waiting for something to happen. Now, like many other CIA documents, this one was declassified in the year 2000. It revealed lots of CIA experiments in remote viewing, but also showed that their interests didn't just lie in Russia, but in extraterrestrial locations as well. Now, I highly recommend reading the document. I had stumbled across it a number of years ago and didn't really read the entire thing. But going back after all of that time, I found many very interesting parts. Now, it's difficult, obviously, to prove the accuracy of this remote viewing session, but recent discoveries hint there might be more to Mars than meets the eye. At least initially. Now, a subculture of the internet has long scrutinized pictures picked up by our Martian rovers to see if certain rocks look like they shouldn't be natural. And I think many of the things that they see, they're choosing to see. But there are other pictures from Mars that are undeniably suspicious. Lines that shouldn't be as square or straight as they are. Things that look like they could be the ruins of cities. And in fact, if you think that it is ludicrous to suggest that there could have been life on Mars, remember that us sending our rovers to explore Mars would be the equivalent to sending a small drone to somewhere in the Sahara Desert, searching for a couple of years and saying that nobody lived on Earth. Planets are pretty massive, and evidence of something millions of years ago, like a civilization, would be difficult to pick up on. In fact, if in this very moment a similar cataclysm hit Earth, we would only have about 5 million years before every single trace of us was wiped off the surface of the planet. and the only thing we would leave behind is a very, very thin line of heightened levels of plastic and nuclear isotopes. But of course we could argue all day about the likelihood of there being an ancient civilization on Mars. Let me get to the interesting part of this video, at least interesting to me. See, I tried my own remote viewing session, and the results were peculiar. Now, when I conducted this remote viewing experiment, it was mostly for fun. I wasn't really serious about it, but I had heard of the document where somebody remote viewed Mars, and I wanted to give it a try for myself. So me and my friend Cole Squire sat down to see what I could see on the red planet. And what follows, I think, is noteworthy at least. And so that you don't have to take my word for it, I actually called Cole today unprompted and asked him to give me his memory of the story. I'm going to let you listen to his words. All right, Cole.
Yes, sir.
What's up, man?
Nothing much. I am just chilling here in Florida. How you doing?
Pretty good. Doing some research. I wanted to call you because in a video that I am currently making, I am talking about a certain thing that happened, and I just wanted to see if you could give your side of that story. I know it was a couple of years ago, but I just wanted to see, unprompted, unrehearsed. We didn't discuss this beforehand. I just wanted to get your viewpoint of the, succinctly, you don't have to go into detail, of the Mars remote viewing episode.
Yeah. I'll go into as many broad strokes as I can remember. From what I recall, you attempted to remote view Mars, but I don't remember if you had any specifics in terms of time or place in mind. But in your attempt to remote view Mars, you perceived what you believed to be, what you called it was, it's like a white marble under the surface, but you're looking at like a planetary scale, and so you were describing something that you believed was a like large, possibly domed or spherical shelter, subterranean shelter on Mars, wherein there were seemingly like living beings. And you said that you perceived words on the outside of this like white spherical or hemispherical structure, but the words were probably not like something that were literally on the surface of this thing, but that were messaging that was coming from the beings inside. So the message that you perceived being broadcast out there and that you saw as if it was like written on the surface of the sphere was, we are watching/waiting for you to open your hearts/minds. But you backed up and described it to me as though it wasn't watching/waiting, but that it was rather one word or one concept that encompasses what both of those things are in our language. So it was like, we are waiting for you to open your heart minds. So kind of more, I guess, inclusive singular words from whatever language this came from. And that took on a real interesting meaning to us maybe like a couple days or maybe a week later, because we were reading the declassified CIA Mars remote viewing document that's on their reading room website. Anyway, we were I think both of us had encountered it before, but like not in many years. At the very least I had seen it before, but we were just like reading it because I think we were on a Mars kick. We were like, yeah, we should check that out and just comb it for good information. And while we're reading it, we noticed this part that's like just absolutely unimportant, easy to gloss over, probably wasn't important to them, probably hasn't been important to anyone else that's ever read it, but we're reading it, and what Joe is dictating as he's seeing these images in this remote viewing session, what's recorded from his dictation. So he sees these beings in some sort of shelter. He describes a different shelter than what you saw, but nevertheless he sees beings, and he says, hold on, let me try to remember this exactly.
I can help out with this part if you want, just because I've perused the material recently.
I think I just remembered, because I knew there was a distinction between his and yours, and I couldn't remember what it was now.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so he says they're waiting for someone to come back, or something like that. He describes the beings that are left in this shelter in some sort of, weakened state. He describes these leave behinds as looking, and then corrects himself, no, waiting for, and we read this and we were like, what the heck? Like, he had the exact same little difficulty of translation that you did when describing what these beings were doing or what they were experiencing, what they were communicating, really. And that was just like mind-blowing to us, because I mean, yours didn't come from that. This wasn't something that was influencing your experience with remote viewing. You just had a completely isolated, separate thing. And in reviewing this material, we see like the exact same little word difficulty, translation difficulty happen to someone else. And yeah, for me anyway, it was like I didn't necessarily place a value on what came out of your remote viewing session in terms of like how likely to be true or accurate it was. I just kind of took it for what it was. I hadn't weighted it yet. But once we read that, I was like, holy crap, like that's, 2 points, a straight line. I was like, okay, so this to me is a confirmation of some amount of accuracy in what you perceived during your remote viewing session.
Yeah, I think we're both a little surprised, because it was mostly for fun that we were engaging in this, it felt like, and then seeing that come together was sobering. So no, thanks, man. I really appreciate that story. That's how I remember it too.
Sweet, yeah.
So, I'm not saying that I necessarily remote viewed the surface of Mars. I'm not saying remote viewing is possible, or that there was anything on Mars other than 4 million years of rocks and dust. What I am saying is that I think that there's at least a chance that me and this remote viewer saw something similarly, or tapped into some sort of vein. I like to live my life open to possibility. I'm not saying for sure that I know definitively that any of this is true, but I'm saying it might be. And I can also tell you that you can live your whole life doubting things, and that's fine. But you can also live your life entertaining the possibility of magic and wonder and mystery. And I know at the end of the day, which of those two lives I want to live. Thank you everybody for tuning in for this episode of Outlandish. I am actually gonna do the call to action, which I never do on this channel. Please like and subscribe this video. I wanna keep making these sort of things. I wanna keep delving into these mysteries and sharing the magic with other people. If you like this content, feel free to follow along. And if it's not your thing, it's not gonna hurt my feelings if you scroll on by. I think that there should be different corners of the internet where people feel safe to imagine. Corners of the internet where you can find something a little bit outlandish.